December 18th, 1944. The roads leading east into the Belgian town of Bastogne are a chaotic river of steel and slush. Private First Class Martin of the 101st Airborne Division grips his M1 Garand tight as the open-topped cattle truck lurches through the freezing mud. The wind cuts through his thin field jacket, offering little protection against the plunging temperatures. Beside him, men huddle together for warmth, their breath forming distinct clouds in the damp air. They are supposed to be resting in France, recovering from the hell of Holland. But a desperate order has thrown them into the path of a German juggernaut. Only 24 hours earlier, these men were enjoying the relative safety of Camp Mormelon in France. They were washing away the grime of Operation Market Garden and looking forward to a peaceful Christmas football game. That illusion of peace shattered when officers stormed into the barracks with urgent orders to move out immediately. There was no time for briefings and certainly no time to gather proper winter equipment. The supply sergeants raided the camp depots, tossing ammunition and K-rations to the troopers. But there were simply not enough overshoes or heavy coats to go around for the thousands of men now mobilizing. The convoy stretches for miles, a frantic line of headlights cutting through the night. Violating every standard blackout regulation in the book, the urgency of the situation overrides the fear of the Luftwaffe. Allied command knows that the German army has broken through the thin American lines in the Ardennes forest, creating a massive bulge in the front. The enemy is racing toward the Meuse River, and the only thing standing in their way is a confused network of retreating infantry, and this hastily assembled column of paratroopers rushing toward a town most of them have never heard of. Bastogne is not just a quaint market town, it is the vital heartbeat of the road network in the southern Ardennes. 7 main paved roads converge in its center, spreading out like the spokes of a wheel. For the heavy German panzer divisions to sustain their blitzkrieg speed and reach the port of Antwerp, they absolutely must control these roads. Without Bastogne, the German tanks will be forced onto muddy, unpaved logging trails that will bog down their advance and starve their engines of fuel. The race is on, and the winner will determine the fate of the entire Western Front. Inside the town, the situation is dangerously fluid. Brigadier General Anthony McAuliffe, the acting commander of the 101st Airborne in the absence of Maxwell Taylor, arrives to find a scene bordering on panic. Elements of the shattered 28th Infantry Division are streaming back from the front lines, their eyes hollow with the 1,000-yard stare. They tell terrifying stories of massive Tiger tanks appearing out of the mist and overrunning their positions. McAuliffe meets with General Troy Middleton, whose 8 Corps headquarters is preparing to evacuate, and receives a simple but daunting directive: hold Bastogne at all costs. To buy time for the paratroopers to dig in, Combat Command B of the 10th Armored Division is already on the scene. Colonel William Roberts, a seasoned tanker, knows that his Sherman tanks cannot go toe-to-toe with the heavier German armor in a straight fight. Instead, he divides his force into 3 separate teams: Team de Sobry, Team Cherry, and Team O'Hara, and sends them to the villages east of Bastogne. Their suicide mission is to create roadblocks that will slow the German advance just long enough for the 101st to establish a defensive perimeter around the city. Major William de Sobry leads his small task force north toward the village of Noville. The fog is so thick that his tank commanders have to stand up in their turrets just to see the road, exposing themselves to sniper fire. As they roll into the village, the sounds of battle echo ominously from the east. De Sobry orders his men to set up defensive positions, positioning his few Sherman tanks and tank destroyers to cover the main approaches. They are unaware that the entire 2nd Panzer Division, a force vastly superior in number and firepower, is heading straight for them. Meanwhile, Team Cherry moves east to the village of Longvilly to try and stem the tide of the Panzer-Lehr Division. The fighting here is confused and savage. American half-tracks and light tanks clash with the German vanguard in the narrow streets and muddy fields. The roar of 88mm cannons splits the air as German tanks blast through the hastily erected American roadblocks. The distinct ripping sound of MG-42 machine guns forces the American infantry to dive into the freezing ditches. Every hour they hold out is purchased with blood, but it gives the paratroopers in Bastogne precious time to deploy. Back in Bastogne, the men of the 501st Parachute Infantry Regiment are the first to arrive and are immediately sent east to support the crumbling armor roadblocks. They march past the fleeing civilians who are piling their belongings onto carts and bicycles, desperate to escape the coming storm. The juxtaposition is jarring for the soldiers. They are marching toward the very horror that these people are fleeing. The paratroopers crack jokes to hide their nerves, checking their weapons and distributing their limited ammunition. They know that they are walking into a collision with the best armored units the Third Reich has left. The first major engagement for the paratroopers occurs near the village of Nefe. The 1st Battalion of the 501st runs headlong into the advancing German columns. The skirmish is sudden and violent. Mortar shells begin to rain down on the road, throwing plumes of dirt and snow into the air. The Americans scramble off the road and into the tree line, returning fire with their rifles and machine guns. They lack the heavy anti-tank weapons needed to stop the German armor effectively, so they rely on bazookas and well-placed gammon grenades to disable the tracks of the lead vehicles. As darkness falls on that first night, the temperature drops even further, turning the mud into rock-hard ruts. The men of the 101st Airborne begin to dig in, but the frozen ground resists their entrenching tools. They are forced to occupy shallow foxholes, shivering uncontrollably in their summer-weight uniforms. The sounds of heavy diesel engines grinding in the distance keep them on edge. They can hear the squeak of tank treads and the guttural commands of German officers in the dark woods just a few hundred yards away. The enemy is closing the noose. General Heinrich von Lüttwitz, commanding the German XLVI Panzer Corps, is frustrated by the delays. He expected to brush aside the American resistance and seize Bastogne by now. The unexpected arrival of the American paratroopers has disrupted his timetable. He orders his commanders to increase the pressure, believing that a swift, violent push will shatter the morale of the lightly armed defenders. He does not realize that he is facing an elite airborne unit that is accustomed to being surrounded and outgunned. The Germans prepare for a night attack, probing the American lines for weaknesses. To the north at Neuville, Team Dessabry is fighting for its life. The Germans launch a massive assault under the cover of the fog. American tank destroyers, the M-18 Hellcats, use their speed to shoot and scoot, taking shots at the side armor of the German Panthers before retreating to new cover. The village is burning, casting an eerie orange glow against the low clouds. The fighting devolves into hand-to-hand combat in the ruins of farmhouses. The Americans are outnumbered and outgunned, but their stubborn resistance convinces the German commanders that they are facing a much larger force. Back at the division headquarters in Bastogne, the intelligence reports are grim. The roads to the north, south, and east are all blocked by enemy forces. The only remaining supply route is a narrow corridor to the west, and German reconnaissance units are already threatening to cut that as well. General McAuliffe looks at the map, the red arrows of the German advance curling around his position like the fingers of a closing fist. He realizes that the race to the crossroads has been a draw. The Americans have reached the town, but they have not stopped the German tide. By the morning of December 19th, the reality of their situation begins to sink in for the rank and file. The artillery fire from the German lines becomes more organized and intense, walking systematically across the American positions. The Red Ball Express supply trucks that had been bringing in ammunition have turned back. The last ambulances carrying the wounded make a desperate dash out of the city, dodging artillery shells on the road to Neufchâteau. The door is slamming shut. The siege of Bastogne is about to begin, and the men inside are trapped in a white hell. The morning of December 19th brings a catastrophe that will haunt the defenders of Bastogne for the duration of the siege. While the combat troops are frantically digging foxholes on the eastern perimeter, the division's lifeline is severed in the west. The 326th Airborne Medical Company had set up their field hospital near the intersection of roads leading to Sibret, believing they were in a safe rear area. That illusion dissolves in a hail of machine gun fire as German armored vehicles from the panic-inducing Panzer Lehr Division crash through the thin American lines. The attack is swift, brutal, and totally unexpected. In a matter of minutes, the hospital is overrun by enemy forces. German troops storm the tents and farm buildings, capturing the entire medical staff, their equipment, and the critical surgical teams. It is a devastating blow that cripples the division's ability to care for its wounded before the battle has even fully begun. The captured doctors and nurses are marched away into captivity, leaving behind a void that cannot be filled. Inside Bastogne, the grim news spreads quietly among the officers. If you get hit now, there are no surgeons to patch you up. Back in the town centre, Major Al Paul, the regimental surgeon for the 506th, scrambles to organize makeshift aid stations in the basements of the local seminary and other sturdy buildings. The situation is medieval in its desperation. Without proper surgical kits or anesthesia, the medics are forced to rely on limited supplies of morphine and bottles of cognac scavenged from local cellars. They tear up bedsheets to use as bandages for the shrapnel wounds that are already pouring in. The groans of the injured echo off the stone walls, a constant reminder of the precariousness of their situation. To the north, the village of Noville has become a slaughterhouse. The 1st Battalion of the 506th Parachute Infantry Regiment, commanded by Lieutenant Colonel James Leprade, has joined forces with the remnants of Team de Sobry. They are facing the full weight of the German 2nd Panzer Division. The fog is so dense here that visibility is often reduced to less than 20 yards. Shapes materialize out of the grey mist-hulking German Tiger tanks that seem invincible to the light weaponry of the paratroopers. The Americans fight back with a ferocity that stuns the German attackers. The American M18 Hellcat tank destroyers, stationed at Noville, engage in a deadly game of cat and mouse with the superior German armour. The M18s are fast and agile, but their armour is paper-thin. The crews must manoeuvre constantly, using the burning wreckage of buildings for cover, darting out to fire a shot at a panther's flank before reversing frantically into the fog. The air is thick with the acrid smell of burning diesel and cordite. Every time a German tank is knocked out, 2 more seem to emerge from the tree line to take its place. Inside the command post at Noville, the tension reaches a breaking point as the enemy artillery zeroes in on the building. Lieutenant Colonel Leprade and Major de Sobry are coordinating the defense when a high-velocity shell slams directly into the command center. The explosion is deafening, collapsing the roof and burying the officers in debris. Leprade is killed instantly, a significant loss of leadership at a critical moment. De Sobry is severely wounded and later captured as the Germans overrun the position. The command structure at the northern tip of the defences is decapitated in a single heartbeat. With the situation at Noville becoming untenable, the order is finally given to withdraw south toward the village of Foy. This retreat is a harrowing gauntlet through the snow. The survivors of the battalion and the tank team must disengage while under direct fire. They load the wounded onto the decks of the remaining tanks and half-tracks, the blood of the injured freezing on the cold steel. As they pull back, they leave behind the burning ruins of Noville, a testament to the delaying action that bought Bastogne another precious 12 hours. On the eastern front, Team Cherry is suffering a similar fate near Longvilly. The German pincers are closing tight. The American roadblocks, manned by a mix of armoured infantry and engineers, are being systematically dismantled by the enemy. The retreat from the east becomes a chaotic race to get behind the main defensive line of the 501st Parachute Infantry. Vehicles that run out of gas are pushed into ditches and set on fire to prevent them from falling into German hands. Men stream back across the fields, exhausted and dirty, carrying only their rifles and the clothes on their backs. By the night of December 20th, the distinct perimeter of Bastogne begins to take shape. It is not a solid wall of steel, but a loose circle of foxholes and machine gun nests roughly 16 miles in circumference. Inside this circle are elements of 4 different airborne regiments, stragglers from the 28th Infantry, and the surviving tanks of the 10th Armoured Division. They are a ragtag force, but they are united by a singular purpose. The officers walk the lines, positioning men to cover every road and logging trail that leads into the city. The reality of the encirclement is confirmed when the last communication wire leading to the outside world goes dead. The Germans have cut the telephone lines and physically blocked the road to Neufchâteau in the south. The 101st Airborne Division is now an island in a sea of German grey. Inside the command bunker, General McAuliffe studies the map. There are 7 German divisions manoeuvring around his position. He is outnumbered approximately 5 to 1. He checks the supply manifests and realizes they are critically low on 155mm artillery shells. The weather continues to be the Germans' greatest ally. A thick, suffocating blanket of low clouds and fog hangs over the Ardennes, grounding the mighty Allied Air Force. The The American soldiers can hear the engines of German planes overhead, but they see no friendly stars and stripes in the sky. Without air support, the paratroopers are deprived of their flying artillery and their resupply drops. They look up at the grey ceiling with frustration, knowing that the P-47 Thunderbolts that could smash the German tanks are sitting uselessly on runways in France and England. Inside the town of Bastogne, the civilian population is gripped by terror. Thousands of residents have chosen to stay in their cellars rather than risk the open roads. They share their meager food stocks with the American soldiers, warm potato soup and stale bread becoming a luxury for the freezing troops. The bond between the Belgian civilians and the GIs strengthens in the damp darkness of the basements. The civilians pray the rosary while the soldiers clean their weapons, both groups listening intently to the thunder of artillery growing louder on the outskirts of town. As the sun sets on December 21st, the encirclement is complete. The Germans have successfully bypassed Bastogne to the north and south, pushing their spearheads toward the Meuse River, but they cannot ignore the thorn in their side. Bastogne blocks their supply lines, choking the fuel needed for the tanks at the front. The German High Command decides that Bastogne must be erased. They begin to move their heavy artillery into position, preparing to pound the city into submission. The siege has officially transitioned from a meeting engagement to a fight for survival. The paratroopers in their foxholes dig deeper, hacking at the frozen earth with numb fingers. They have no winter boots, and many are wrapping their feet in burlap sacks to ward off the frostbite that is already claiming toes. They count their rounds of ammunition, knowing there will be no more coming by truck. A grim determination settles over the line. They are the battered bastards of the Bastion, surrounded, cut off, and outgunned. But as one sergeant famously remarks to a nervous private, "They've got us surrounded. The poor bastards." The enemy is no longer just the German army. It is the elements themselves. By December 22nd, the temperature plummets to record lows, turning the Ardennes forest into a freezer. The mercury drops well below zero, a biting cold that seeps through the layers of the paratroopers' inadequate clothing. Most men are still wearing their M1943 field jackets over standard wool shirts, an ensemble designed for autumn in France. Not a harsh Belgian winter. They shiver uncontrollably in their foxholes, their breath freezing on their scarves as the wind whips through the pine trees with a mournful howl. The most insidious threat comes from the ground up. The foxholes, dug into the snow-covered earth, inevitably become damp basins of slush. Soldiers sit with their feet submerged in freezing water for hours on end, unable to dry their socks or rotate their boots. The result is trench foot, a debilitating condition where the flesh turns black and necrotic from poor circulation and prolonged exposure. It takes men off the line just as effectively as a German bullet. Platoon sergeants conduct mandatory foot inspections, ordering men to massage each other's feet to keep the blood flowing. But for many, the damage is already done, visually. The Americans are dangerously exposed against the pristine white landscape. Their olive-drab uniforms stand out like ink blots on a blank page, making them easy targets for German snipers and forward observers. Desperation breeds ingenuity among the troops. They raid local farmhouses for white bedsheets, tablecloths, and even lace curtains to fashion crude snow capes. Some men use white paint or chalk found in barns to camouflage their helmets and weapons. This motley collection of makeshift winter gear gives the defensive line a ghostly, ragged appearance as they wait silently in the mist. Across the lines, the German war machine rumbles with terrifying mechanical superiority. The XLVI Panzer Corps is equipped with Panther and Tiger tanks, steel behemoths that boast thick armor and high-velocity cannons. The American paratroopers, by contrast, are light infantry. They have virtually no tank support, and their primary anti-tank weapon, the 36-inch bazooka, is laughably ineffective against the frontal armor of a Tiger. A bazooka round often bounces harmlessly off the German steel, leaving only a scorch mark. To destroy a tank, a paratrooper must let it pass and hit it in the rear engine block, a feat requiring nerves of steel. The disparity in firepower is compounded by a critical shortage of artillery ammunition. The 101st Division Artillery, commanded by Colonel Joseph Sherburne, is now under strict rationing orders. The 105mm and 155mm howitzer crews are told to fire only at clearly identified targets. There is no harassing fire, no interdiction barrages to disrupt enemy movement. Every shell must count. The gunners wait until the German infantry is practically on top of the wire before unleashing a volley, terrified that the next fire mission might be their last due to empty caissons. Life in the perimeter becomes a blur of sensory deprivation and sudden terror. The nights are the worst. The dense pine forests amplify every snapping twig and crunching footstep, playing tricks on the exhausted minds of the sentries. A deer moving through the brush sounds like a German patrol. A falling branch sounds like a grenade pin being pulled. Men stare into the darkness until their eyes water, fighting the overwhelming urge to sleep. To sleep in this cold without a sleeping bag is to risk never waking up. As hypothermia quietly shuts down the body's vital functions, hunger gnaws at the men almost as fiercely as the cold. The encirclement has cut off the flow of K-rations, and the stockpiles are dwindling rapidly. Soldiers are rationing a single cracker or a tin of cheese spread to last an entire day. They melt snow in their canteen cups to make weak instant coffee, just to have something warm in their bellies. The lack of calories makes it even harder for their bodies to generate heat, creating a vicious cycle of fatigue and freezing. They dream of hot turkey dinners while chewing on frozen energy bars that are hard enough to crack a tooth. The Germans do not let the defenders rest. They launch constant probing attacks to test the strength of the American line. These are not full-scale assaults yet, but quick, violent jabs designed to uncover weak points. A squad of German infantry might rush a machine gun nest, spray it with MP40 fire, and then vanish back into the woods. These hit-and-run tactics keep the Americans in a state of perpetual high alert. Every sector of the perimeter reports contact, from Champs in the west to Marvy in the southeast. The pressure is being applied evenly, squeezing the defenders tight. The Germans also employ psychological tactics to break the American will. At night, radio broadcasts aim at the trapped troops, telling them their commanders have abandoned them and that their wives back home are with other men. The Germans set up loudspeakers in the woods, playing the eerie sounds of heavy tank engines revving or the screams of wounded men. They fire propaganda leaflets into the American lines, promising hot food and warm beds to anyone who surrenders. The paratroopers mostly use the paper for toilet tissue, their morale bruised but unbroken. Inside the basements of Bastogne, the civilians are suffering alongside the soldiers. The shelling has intensified, turning the town into a ruin of brick and mortar. Fires burn unchecked because there is no water pressure to fight them. Families huddle under blankets, terrified by the constant ground-shaking thuds of the impact. The local priest moves from cellar to cellar, offering communion and comfort. He sees the fear in the eyes of the children and the stoic resignation of the elderly. They are trapped in the eye of the storm, praying for deliverance that seems increasingly unlikely. The weather acts as a force multiplier for the confusion. The thick, freezing fog that clings to the ground limits visibility to a few yards, neutralizing the American advantage in small arms marksmanship. In this white void, battles are fought at point-blank range. Friendly fire incidents become a constant worry as patrols stumble into each other in the mist. The lack of visual contact between adjacent foxholes creates a sense of profound isolation. A soldier can be 50 feet from his buddy and feel as though he is the last man on earth. At the makeshift aid stations, the situation is becoming horrific. With the field hospital captured, the medics are running out of everything. Plasma is frozen solid and must be warmed against a medic's body before it can be used. There are no clean bandages left, so wounds are wrapped in whatever cloth is available. Gangrene begins to set in for those with severe injuries, filling the aid stations with the sickly sweet smell of rotting flesh. The wounded lie on the stone floors, covered in straw, waiting for an evacuation that is impossible. Despite the misery, the paratrooper spirit endures. These men are the elite, volunteers who signed up for the hardest duty the army had to offer. They adapt with grim efficiency. They learn to line their foxholes with straw and cardboard from supply drops to provide insulation. They pool their cigarettes and share their last socks. The NCOs, the backbone of the division, keep the discipline tight, ensuring weapons are cleaned and watches are kept. They gripe and complain, but they do not break. They are the 101st, and they have never been beaten. From the German side, The view is one of frustration. General von Lüttwitz cannot understand why the Americans won't collapse. His troops are suffering in the cold, too. But they have the momentum and the firepower. He sees the stubborn resistance at Bastogne as a nuisance that is delaying his march to the sea. He orders the 26th Volksgrenadier Division to tighten the ring and prepare for a decisive blow. He believes that one strong push will crack the shell and allow him to wipe the town from the map. As the sun sets on another freezing day, a strange quiet falls over the battlefield. The wind dies down, and the snow begins to fall gently, covering the blood-stained earth in a fresh coat of white. It is a deceptively peaceful scene. Inside the American perimeter, the men check their ammo one last time and settle in for the long night. They know the Germans are planning something big. The probing attacks have stopped. The artillery has paused. The enemy is coiling for a strike. The white hell of winter is about to get much hotter. The morning of December 22nd brings a bizarre interlude to the violence that has engulfed the Ardennes. Around 1:30 a.m., the mist hanging over the southern perimeter near the Arlon road parts to reveal a sight that causes the American defenders to hold their fire. 4 figures emerge from the German lines, walking boldly upright toward the foxholes manned by the 327th Glider Infantry Regiment. 2 are officers and 2 are enlisted men, and one of them is waving a large white flag. The sudden appearance of the truce party creates a ripple of confusion among the glider troops, who keep their M1 Garands trained on the approaching enemy while shouting for their superior officers. Staff Sergeant Carl Dickinson and Private First Class Ernest Premetz venture out to meet the German delegation in the muddy no-man's land. The German senior officer, a major with a polished demeanor, salutes stiffly and speaks in broken English. He insists on speaking to the American commanding general, claiming he carries a message of the utmost importance. Premetz, who speaks fluent German, translates the request while keeping his finger near the trigger of his weapon. The tension is palpable as the Americans try to discern if this is a genuine parley or a ruse to scout their defensive positions for an artillery strike. Captain James Adams, the company commander, arrives on the scene and quickly takes charge of the situation. He orders the Germans to be blindfolded to ensure they cannot gather intelligence on the American troop strength or layout. The German officers are insulted but comply, allowing strips of cloth to be tied over their eyes. They are then led on a disorienting walk to the battalion command post, stumbling over the frozen ruts in the road. Meanwhile, the American soldiers in the nearby foxholes watch the spectacle with a mixture of curiosity and suspicion, wondering what the Krauts could possibly have to say. The message carried by the Germans is a typed 2-page ultimatum from General Heinrich von Lüttwitz. It is a document dripping with arrogance and dire threats. It describes the encirclement of Bastogne and the overwhelming strength of the German artillery and armored corps waiting to crush the town. The letter offers the Americans a simple choice: the honorable surrender of the encircled town, or total annihilation. The Germans give the American commander a strict deadline of 2 hours to respond. If the answer is negative, they promise that an artillery bombardment will begin that will kill every soldier and civilian within the perimeter. The ultimatum makes its way up the chain of command to the division headquarters in the center of Bastogne. Brigadier General Anthony McAuliffe is resting in his underground command post when the operations officer, Lieutenant Colonel Ned Moore, wakes him up. McAuliffe is groggy and exhausted from days of sleepless command. When Moore tells him there is a German surrender ultimatum, McAuliffe initially misunderstands the situation. He asks incredulously if the Germans want to surrender to him, when Moore corrects him, explaining that the Germans are demanding the American surrender. McAuliffe's reaction is immediate and visceral. McAuliffe, a man known for his mild manners but steely resolve, tosses the paper onto his desk with a look of disgust. He utters a phrase that will become immortalized in military history: "Us surrender. Ah, nuts." The room falls silent for a moment before the staff officers exchange amused glances. The sheer absurdity of the German demand, given the fighting spirit of the 101st, strikes a chord with everyone in the bunker. They know they are surrounded, but they do not feel beaten. The idea of laying down their arms is completely foreign to their doctrine and their personal pride. The problem now is how to formulate an official written response to the German general. The clock is ticking on the 2-hour deadline. McAuliffe asks his staff for suggestions on what to say. Lieutenant Colonel Harry Kinnard, the division's brilliant operations officer, speaks up from the corner of the room. He suggests that the general's initial reaction was actually the best answer. He tells McAuliffe to just tell them nuts. McAuliffe thinks for a second, smiles, and grabs a pencil. He writes the single word on a piece of paper, centers it, and signs it. The American commander, Colonel Joseph Harper, the commander of the 327th Glider Infantry, is tasked with delivering this unconventional reply to the waiting German delegation. He takes the typed note and drives back to the outpost where the German officers are waiting, still blindfolded and growing impatient. Harper removes their blindfolds and hands the envelope to the German major. The German officer opens it and reads the single word with a look of utter confusion. He looks at Harper and asks what this means. Unable to find nuts in his mental dictionary of diplomatic military terminology, Harper, realizing the idiomatic nature of the reply might be lost in translation, decides to make it crystal clear. He leans in close to the German officer and says, in plain English, it means go to hell. He then gestures toward the German lines and tells them that if they continue to attack, the Americans will kill every last one of them. The German major stiffens, salutes, and turns on his heel. The truce party marches back into the fog, carrying the most famous rejection in the history of warfare. The deadline has been rejected, and the Americans brace for the consequences. As the German delegation disappears into the woods, the word of McAuliffe's reply begins to spread like wildfire through the foxholes. It passes from sergeant to private, from radio operator to medic. Nuts becomes an instant rallying cry. It perfectly encapsulates the attitude of the paratroopers, defiant, irreverent, and utterly unafraid. The men in the freezing pits check their weapons and adjust their helmets with renewed vigor. The general has spoken for all of them. They might die in this frozen Belgian town, but they will never give the Germans the satisfaction of seeing a white flag. The German response to the insult is not long in coming. As the deadline expires, the enemy unleash their fury. The total annihilation promised in the ultimatum begins with a massive artillery barrage. Heavy 155mm shells and Nebelwerfer rockets scream into the town centre, smashing buildings into rubble. The ground shakes violently, sending clouds of red brick dust and snow into the air. The shelling is indiscriminate, targeting the civilian basements as well as the military command posts. The noise is a constant, thunderous roar that drowns out all conversation and thought. As night falls, the terror escalates with the arrival of the Luftwaffe. German Junkers, Ju-88 bombers appear over the city, dropping incendiary bombs that turn Bastogne into a blazing torch. The fires illuminate the night sky, casting long, dancing shadows across the snow. The town square, once a place of commerce and community, is reduced to a cratered wasteland. The aid stations are overwhelmed with fresh casualties, both soldiers and civilians, who are pulled from the burning wreckage. The smell of smoke mixes with the smell of cordite, creating a choking atmosphere of destruction. Despite the ferocity of the bombardment, the American defensive line holds firm. The paratroopers in the perimeter endure the shelling in their foxholes, crouching low and praying that a direct hit doesn't find them. They know that the artillery is just the prelude to a ground assault. The Germans will try to make good on their threat by sending waves of tanks and infantry to wipe them out. The men of the 101st tighten their grip on their rifles, their eyes scanning the darkness for movement. The defiance of nuts has bought them a moral victory. But the physical battle is about to reach its crescendo. The psychological impact of the day cannot be overstated. For the Germans, the rejection is a baffling sign of American arrogance and stupidity. They cannot understand why a surrounded force would choose death over surrender. For the Americans, it is a defining moment of identity. They are no longer just isolated units fighting for survival. They are a legendary force making a stand against impossible odds. The story of the one-word answer travels all the way back to Allied command, serving as a beacon of hope in the midst of the catastrophic failure of the Battle of the Bulge. However, courage alone cannot stop a Tiger tank. The reality of the supply situation remains critical. The artillery batteries are down to their last few rounds of ammunition. The tank destroyers are running on fumes. The medical supplies are exhausted, General McAuliffe knows that his defiant words must be backed up by a relief column or an airdrop soon, or the history books will record nuts as the final brave words of a doomed division. As the fires burn in Bastogne, the eyes of the defenders turn once again to the grey, unforgiving sky, waiting for a miracle. The German reaction to General McAuliffe's defiance is immediate and furious, transforming the perimeter into a cauldron of violence. On December 23rd, the enemy decides that if the Americans will not surrender, they must be physically pushed out of the key defensive anchors. The village of Marvy, situated on the crucial southeastern approach to Bastogne, becomes the focal point of this renewed aggression. The men of the 327th Glider Infantry Regiment, dug into the frozen mud around the village, watch as the tree line erupts with the muzzle flashes of German armor. The silence of the winter morning is shattered by the mechanical shriek of tank tracks grinding over the hard earth. The attack on Marvy is not a probe, it is a hammer blow intended to shatter the American line. German Panzer IVs and Panthers roll forward, using the low ground to mask their approach until they are almost on top of the defenders. Inside the village, the glider troops scramble to their fighting positions, their hearts pounding against their ribs. They are supported by the remnants of Team O'Hara, a small collection of light tanks and half-tracks that look pitifully fragile next to the German heavyweights. The American tankers know that a direct hit from a Panther's 75mm gun will turn their vehicles into crematoriums. As the German tanks breach the outskirts of Marvy, the battle devolves into a chaotic, close-quarters brawl. The American infantrymen, lacking heavy anti-tank weapons, are forced to let the steel monsters roll right past their foxholes. They wait with bated breath until the accompanying German infantry comes into view, then unleash a withering crossfire of machine gun and rifle fire to strip the tanks of their protection. This tactic requires nerves of steel, as the ground shakes violently under the weight of the passing armor, threatening to collapse the walls of the foxholes and bury the men alive. The desperate nature of the defense forces the Americans to rely heavily on the mobile firepower of the 705th Tank Destroyer Battalion. These crews, operating M-18 Hellcats, are the unsung heroes of the siege, racing from one crisis point to another like a fire brigade. At Marvy, they engage in a deadly game of hide-and-seek among the burning farmhouses. The Hellcat commanders know they cannot penetrate the frontal armor of the German tanks, so they use their speed to flank the enemy. They dart out from behind barns, fire a high-velocity round into the thinner side armor of a Panther, and reverse into cover before the German turret can traverse. To the northwest, near the village of Champs, the 502nd Parachute Infantry Regiment faces a similar onslaught. The German 26th Volksgrenadier Division, desperate to break the deadlock, throws wave after wave of white-clad infantry against the American lines. The Paratroopers, commanded by Lieutenant Colonel Steve Chapwis, hold their fire until the last possible second to conserve ammunition. When they finally open up, the effect is devastating. The German assault waves melt away in the face of disciplined American marksmanship, leaving hundreds of bodies scattered across the snow-covered fields like fallen distinct dominoes. The supply situation within the perimeter has now reached a critical nadir, threatening to undo all the tactical brilliance on the ground. The artillery batteries are down to less than 10 rounds per gun per day, a terrifyingly low number for a division under siege. The gunners are forced to hoard their shells, ignoring calls for support against infantry concentrations and saving their precious ammunition only for direct threats from enemy armor. Every time a German tank is reported, the artillery officers have to make a heart-wrenching calculation about whether the target is worth the expenditure of a shell that cannot be replaced. Hunger is also taking a toll on the combat effectiveness of the troops. The men have not had a hot meal in days, subsisting on frozen chocolate bars and pockets full of raw oats scavenged from local barns. The lack of calories makes the cold feel even more penetrating, slowing reflexes and dulling the mind. Soldiers resort to boiling snow in their helmets and adding bouillon powder to create a salty, warm broth that provides a fleeting moment of comfort. They fight with a gnawing emptiness in their stomachs, their bodies consuming their own muscle mass to keep going in the sub-zero temperatures. Despite these physical deprivations, the morale of the battered bastards remains paradoxically high. The shared misery has forged a bond between the paratroopers, glider riders, and tankers that is unbreakable. They fight not for strategy or geography, but for the man in the next foxhole. When a position is overrun, as happens frequently in the seesaw battles for the outlier villages, the Americans launch immediate, savage counterattacks to retake the lost ground. They refuse to give the Germans a single inch of Bastogne, treating every farmhouse and hedgerow as if it was sacred American soil. The Germans, for their part, are bleeding heavily for every attempt they make to tighten the noose. The fields around Bastogne are becoming a graveyard for the Panzerwaffe. The hulks of burning tanks litter the approaches to Marvy and Champs, sending pillars of greasy black smoke into the grey sky. The American infantry has learned to use the terrain to their advantage, turning the stone houses of the Belgian villages into fortresses. They plant mines in the snow and fell trees across the roads, forcing the German armour into kill zones where the tank destroyers lie in wait. Inside the command post, General McAuliffe manages the battle with a cool, detached professionalism that steadies his exhausted staff. He moves his limited reserves around the interior lines like chess pieces, plugging holes in the perimeter just as they are about to burst. He knows that his men are fighting on borrowed time. The number of wounded at the aid stations is growing exponentially, and the lack of medical supplies means that many treatable injuries are becoming fatal. He needs the weather to break, or the sheer weight of the German numbers will eventually crush his division. The intensity of the fighting at Marvy reaches a crescendo as night falls. The village is ablaze, the flames casting flickering shadows that dance macabrely on the snow. American and German soldiers are fighting room to room, tossing grenades through windows and firing through floorboards. The confusion is total. In the darkness, it is impossible to tell friend from foe until the muzzle flashes illuminate a uniform. The cries of the wounded mix with the roar of the fire and the staccato bark of automatic weapons, creating a symphony of hell on earth. The 705th Tank Destroyer Battalion continues its heroic work throughout the night, engaging targets by the light of the burning buildings. They lose vehicles and crews, but they exact a heavy toll on the enemy. By the time the sun begins to rise, the German attack has stalled. The enemy pulls back, leaving behind the smoking wreckage of their armour and the bodies of their dead. Marvy remains in American hands, but the victory is Pyrrhic. The defenders are exhausted, their ammunition pouches are light, and their faces are blackened with soot and grime. The German commanders are beginning to realize that Bastogne is a nut they cannot crack with their current forces. General von Luttwitz is furious at the delay. Every day he spends pounding his head against the defences of Bastogne is a day lost in the race to Antwerp. He orders even more artillery brought up to the line, determined to pulverize the city into submission if his tanks cannot take it. He does not know that the clock is ticking against him as well, and that the skies above are about to shift the balance of power. Inside the foxholes, the troopers check their feet for frostbite and try to clean their weapons with pieces of dry rag. They are tired beyond words, their eyes red-rimmed and sunken. They have held the line against the best the Third Reich could throw at them, but they know they cannot hold out forever. They look at the grey, overcast sky with a mixture of hope and despair. They need the Air Corps. They need ammo. They need food. But most of all, they need to know that they haven't been forgotten by the world outside the ring of steel. As the faint light of dawn spreads across the horizon on December 23rd, a subtle shift occurs in the atmosphere. The biting wind that has tormented them for days begins to die down. The heavy, suffocating blanket of clouds that has grounded the Allied air power starts to thin, revealing patches of brilliant blue. Heads lift in the foxholes. Eyes turn upward. The rumble of tank engines in the distance is replaced by a different sound, a low, distant hum that grows louder with each passing second. The siege is entering a new phase. The morning of December 23rd dawns with a brilliance that stings the eyes, a stark contrast to the gloom that has suffocated the Ardennes for days. The heavy, leaden curtain of grey clouds that had sealed Bastogne from the outside world finally tears open, revealing a piercingly blue sky. The temperature remains brutally low, freezing the breath in the lungs. But the change in the atmosphere is electric. Inside the foxholes, men who have been crouching in the dirt for an eternity slowly stand up, shielding their eyes against the glare of the sun. They hear a sound that brings tears to the eyes of even the most hardened veterans, the low, steady thrum of hundreds of radial engines approaching from the west. High above the frozen landscape, the vanguard of the IX Troop Carrier Command appears like a swarm of dark specks against the azure canvas. The formation is massive, a train of C-47 Skytrain transport planes stretching as far as the eye can see. They are flying low, braving the intense German flak that immediately begins to blossom in black puffs around them. These slow, lumbering aircraft are essentially defenseless cargo trucks in the sky, maintaining a steady course through the gauntlet of anti-aircraft fire to deliver their precious payload. To the paratroopers on the ground, the silhouette of the C-47 is the most beautiful shape in the world, a symbol that they have not been forgotten by their country. As the planes reach the designated drop zones within the shrinking perimeter, the sky suddenly blooms with color. Hundreds of parachutes deploy in a riot of red, blue, green, and yellow silk, each color coding a specific type of supply. Red bundles carry ammunition, the lifeblood of the defense. Blue bundles hold food, a promise of relief for the starving stomachs. Yellow bundles contain medical equipment, desperately needed by the surgeons working in the bloody sawdust of the aid stations. The sight is so overwhelming that spontaneous cheering erupts from the foxholes, a roar of joy that rivals the noise of the battle itself. Men wave their helmets and dance in the snow, embracing each other as the manna falls from heaven. On the ground, the recovery effort is a frantic scramble. The drop zones are often dangerously close to the German lines, and the enemy is not content to simply watch the resupply. German machine guns open up on the fields, trying to keep the Americans from reaching the bundles. The paratroopers ignore the danger, racing out into the open to drag the heavy canisters back to the safety of the tree line. Every bundle recovered is a victory. Quartermasters immediately break open the crates, distributing bandoliers of M1 ammunition and K-rations to the waiting hands of the infantry. For the first time in days, the fear of running dry in the middle of a firefight begins to recede. But the C-47 seconds are only the first act of this aerial salvation. Following closely on their heels come the hunters, the P-47 Thunderbolts of the tactical air forces. These rugged fighter bombers, with their distinct elliptical wings and massive engines, descend upon the battlefield like avenging angels. For the German tankers who have operated with impunity under the cover of the fog, the arrival of the Jabos is a death sentence. The American pilots spot the dark shapes of panthers and tigers outlined against the white snow and roll into their attack runs, their engines screaming in a high-pitched dive that terrifies those on the ground. The devastation inflicted by the P-47 seconds is immediate and catastrophic. They unleash 500-pound bombs and high-velocity rockets that smash through the top armor of the German tanks, turning the steel beasts into burning coffins. The pilots then strafe the German supply columns and infantry concentrations with their 8.50 caliber machine guns, shredding soft-skinned vehicles and scattering troops into the woods. The roads around Bastogne, once the arteries of the German advance, become choked with the wreckage of the Wehrmacht. The psychological impact is profound. The Germans are forced to go to ground, their momentum shattered by the relentless pressure from the sky. Inside the perimeter, the American artillery batteries roar back to life with a vengeance. The supply drops have delivered thousands of rounds of 105mm and 155mm shells, ending the strict rationing that had silenced the guns. Colonel Sherburne's artillerymen, who had been reduced to watching helplessly as German tanks maneuvered in the open, now unleash hell on the enemy coordinates. The ground shakes as the American howitzers pound the German staging areas, breaking up attacks before they can even begin. The synergy between the air power and the revitalized artillery creates a wall of fire that the Germans cannot penetrate. The bravery of the transport pilots on December 23rd becomes the stuff of legend. Despite the heavy flak that tears wings apart and sets engines on fire, the C-47 crews hold their formation. Some planes are hit and go down in flames, crashing into the pine forests outside the perimeter. Others, with engines smoking and rudders shot away, refuse to turn back until their cargo is kicked out the door. The paratroopers on the ground watch these sacrifices with a somber reverence. They know that every crate of plasma and every box of grenades was purchased with the blood of the aircrews who flew straight into the mouth of the cannon. As evening falls on the 23rd, The mood inside Bastogne has shifted from desperate fatalism to grim confidence. The troops feast on the recovered rations, trading cigarettes and chocolate bars with a renewed sense of camaraderie. The wounded in the aid stations receive fresh plasma and morphine, quieting the screams of pain that had haunted the cellars. General McAuliffe walks the lines. Seeing the change in his men's eyes, they are still surrounded. They are still cold. And they are still outnumbered. But they are no longer alone. The link to the outside world has been re-established, and the realization that the mighty US Army is moving heaven and earth to help them stiffens their resolve. However, the Germans have not given up. Angered by the resupply and the aerial bombardment, the Luftwaffe launches a retaliatory strike on Christmas Eve. Under the cover of darkness, German bombers fly over the town of Bastogne, dropping heavy ordnance on the civilian center. The tragic irony of bombs falling on the night before Christmas is lost on no one. Buildings that had survived the siege thus far are reduced to rubble. One bomb strikes the post of the 101st Division headquarters, burying men under debris. Another hits a civilian shelter, killing 30 refugees who thought they were safe. The war does not pause for the holiday. If anything, it becomes crueler. In the midst of this carnage, General McAuliffe issues a Christmas message to the troops that is distributed to every foxhole. It is a masterpiece of leadership, blending humor with gritty reality. He recaps the situation, the German ultimatum, and his famous nuts reply, which brings a chuckle to the freezing soldiers reading it by the light of a match. He concludes with a sentiment that resonates deeply. We are giving our country and our loved ones at home a worthy Christmas present, and being privileged to take part in this gallant feat of arms, are truly making for ourselves a merry Christmas. It reminds the men that their suffering has a purpose. The arrival of the supplies also allows for a critical tactical adjustment. With plenty of ammunition now available, the paratroopers can employ reconnaissance by fire, shooting into suspected enemy positions to draw a response rather than waiting to be ambushed. The defensive ring around Bastogne hardens into a shell of lead. The 705th Tank Destroyer Battalion, now resupplied with armor-piercing shells, hunts down the remaining German tanks that dare to show themselves. The balance of power has subtly shifted. The besiegers are now being bled white by the besieged, and the hunter has become the hunted. On the outskirts of the perimeter, the German commanders are growing desperate. General von Lüttwitz knows that his time is running out. He receives reports that General Patton's Third Army is fighting its way north with terrifying speed, threatening to break the encirclement from the outside. The German High Command orders one last, all-out attempt to crush Bastogne before Patton arrives. They scrape together their remaining reserves, including the heavy armor of the 15th Panzer Grenadier Division, for a final assault on Christmas Day. They plan to punch through the western defenses, aiming to overrun the command post and force a surrender. As midnight approaches on Christmas Eve, a strange hush falls over the snow-covered fields. In some sectors, the shooting stops entirely. American soldiers, huddled in their foxholes, can hear the distant sound of German soldiers singing Stille Nacht, Silent Night across the lines. It is a haunting, surreal moment of shared humanity in the midst of a slaughterhouse. Some Americans hum along, the melody drifting through the freezing mist. For a few brief minutes, the war seems to recede, replaced by the universal memory of home and peace. But as the last notes fade, the click of safety catches being released reminds everyone that the morning will bring death. The stage is set for the climax of the siege. The Americans are rearmed and reassured, but they are exhausted to the point of collapse. The Germans are desperate and running out of fuel, but they still possess the firepower to wipe the division off the map if they can find a weak spot. The sky has given the 101st a fighting chance, but the final verdict will be decided on the ground. In the snow, with bayonets and hand grenades, the sun sets on Christmas Eve, and the battered bastards of Bastogne prepare for the longest day of their lives. Christmas morning, 1944, does not bring peace to the Ardennes. It brings the final, desperate lunge of the German war machine, under the cover of darkness. The 15th Panzer Grenadier Division launches an all-out assault on the western sector of the perimeter near the village of Champs. Their objective is to punch a hole through the lines of the 327th Glider Infantry and the 502nd Parachute Infantry. aiming directly for the division headquarters. The attack begins with a terrifying realization for the American defenders as 18 German tanks, accompanied by white-clad infantry, slip through the gaps in the line before the sun has even risen. The situation inside the perimeter quickly escalates into a crisis as German Mark IV tanks roll freely behind the American foxholes. The enemy armor bypasses the front-line infantry, heading straight for the command post at Hemrul. For a few heart-stopping hours, it appears the German gamble might succeed. The paratroopers, however, do not panic. They stay in their holes, allowing the tanks to pass, and then engage the German infantry following in their wake. A savage melee erupts in the snow-covered fields, where men fight with bayonets and trench knives to separate the German armor from its protective infantry screen. The defense of the command post falls to the tank destroyers of the 705th Battalion and the bazooka teams of the 502nd, the M18 Hellcats, utilizing their superior speed, maneuver frantically around the slower German vehicles. In the village of Hemrul, a deadly game of cat and mouse unfolds. American destroyers flank the German formation, firing point-blank into the sides and rears of the enemy tanks. The air fills with the screech of metal shearing against metal and the thunderous boom of high-velocity cannons. One by one, the German tanks shudder and burst into flames, their crews bailing out into a hail of small arms fire. By noon on Christmas Day, the German spearhead lies in ruins. Every single one of the 18 tanks that penetrated the line has been destroyed or captured. The fields west of Bastogne are littered with the smoking hulks of the Panzerwaffe and the bodies of the grenadiers who tried to support them. General McAuliffe receives the report that the line has held. The last great German effort to erase the 101st Airborne from the map has failed, broken against the rock-hard discipline of the paratroopers and the lethal efficiency of the tank destroyers. The defenders have given themselves the ultimate Christmas present survival. While the paratroopers are holding the line, a different kind of drama is unfolding a few miles to the south. General George S. Patton has been driving his Third Army with a relentless fury, determined to relieve the besieged city. Leading the charge is the 4th Armored Division, a unit that will soon earn the nickname Patton's Best. The weather is still freezing, and the roads are icy sheets that threaten to slide the 30-ton Sherman tanks into the ditches. But Patton keeps the pressure on, ordering his commanders to bypass resistance and keep moving. He knows the 101st is running on borrowed time. Lieutenant Colonel Creighton Abrams, commanding the 37th Tank Battalion of the 4th Armored, is the tip of the spear, a cigar-chomping tactician with a reputation for aggression. Abrams stares at the map inside his command tank. The village of Assenois stands between him and Bastogne. It is heavily defended by German paratroopers who are determined to stop the relief column. Abrams knows that a cautious approach will take too long. He makes a bold decision to launch a shock attack, ordering his tanks and armored infantry to charge straight through the village while the American artillery is still pounding it. The assault on Assenois on December 26th is a spectacle of modern mechanized warfare. The American artillery barrage lifts only seconds before the lead Sherman tanks roar into the village streets. The German defenders are caught off guard, still huddled in their cellars to escape the shelling. The 4th Armored's tanks blast their way through the rubble, their machine guns suppressing any enemy soldier who dares to lift his head. The armored infantry dismounts from their half-tracks, clearing the houses room by room with grenades and Thompson submachine guns. The momentum of the attack carries them through the village and out the other side. Just outside the village, the road to Bastogne lies open. At 4:50 p.m., a Sherman jumbo tank named Cobra King, commanded by Lieutenant Charles Boggess, spots the friendly pillboxes of the American perimeter. Boggess cautiously approaches the line, wary of mines and nervous trigger fingers. He spots a group of soldiers in olive drab digging in the snow. He calls out to them, and a lieutenant from the 326th Airborne Engineers stands up. The engineer walks over to the tank, extends a hand, and simply says, "Glad to see you." The siege of Bastogne is officially broken. The link-up is tenuous at first, just a narrow corridor through the German lines. But it is enough. That night, the first convoy of ambulances and supply trucks rolls into the battered town. The sight of the fresh troops and vehicles brings a wave of relief to the exhausted defenders, though true to their nature, The paratroopers maintain their bravado. When a tanker from the 4th Armored offers a cigarette to a filthy, bearded paratrooper and asks how they held out, the paratrooper grins and replies that they were doing just fine and didn't need any rescuing. It is the beginning of a friendly rivalry that will last for decades. General Maxwell Taylor, the division commander who had been in Washington when the battle began, rushes back to Bastogne to reunite with his men. He finds a division that has been transformed by the crucible of the siege. They are gaunt, frostbitten, and dirty, but their spirit is unbroken. General McAuliffe, the man who said nuts, is hailed as a hero. The successful defense of Bastogne has completely disrupted the German timetable. By holding the critical road junction, the 101st Airborne acted as a breakwater, splitting the German tide and allowing the Allied armies to regroup and counterattack. The cost of the victory becomes painfully clear as the snow begins to melt in the following weeks. The fields around Bastogne reveal the grim harvest of the battle. Thousands of bodies, both American and German, are recovered from the foxholes and the woods. Many are found frozen in the positions they held when they died, rifles still clutched in stiff hands. The 101st Airborne Division has suffered over 3,000 casualties during the siege. The 10th Armored and the other supporting units have also paid a heavy price. The white landscape is forever stained with the blood of a generation. For the civilians of Bastogne, the liberation is a bittersweet moment. Their town is a ruin. The church, the shops, and the homes where they raised their families are piles of brick and splintered wood. Yet, amidst the destruction, a profound bond has been forged between the people of Bastogne and the American soldiers. The civilians who shared their cellars and their meager food with the G.I. Joes will never forget the men who stood between them and the Nazi tyranny. To this day, the town of Bastogne honors the American liberators with a reverence that transcends generations. The strategic impact of the stand at Bastogne spells the doom of Hitler's Ardennes offensive, with the road network denied to them. The German panzer divisions run out of fuel and are forced to abandon their heavy equipment. The bulge in the line is slowly flattened by the converging Allied armies. The gamble has failed, and the Third Reich has expended its last reserves of elite manpower and armor. The road to Berlin is now open, paved in part by the stubborn refusal of a surrounded division to admit defeat. The legend of the battered bastards of Bastogne is cemented in history. The 101st Airborne Division becomes the first entire division to receive the Distinguished Unit citation. The Screaming Eagle patch becomes a symbol of tenacity and courage recognized around the world. The men who survived the siege carry the memory of the cold and the fear for the rest of their lives. But they also carry the pride of knowing that when the world looked at Bastogne and saw a trap, they saw an opportunity to make history. They stood fast when it mattered most. As the relief columns pour in and the front moves east toward Germany, a quiet returns to the Ardennes forests. The foxholes are slowly filled in by nature. The shrapnel scars on the trees begin to heal, and the wrecked tanks are hauled away for scrap. But the echoes of the battle remain. In the silence of the winter woods, if one listens closely, one can almost hear the crunch of boots on snow, the distant rumble of a Sherman engine, and the defiant laughter of men who looked death in the eye and simply said, "Nuts."